I think it is a good thing. I mean, there were periods, like at the breakup of the Beatles where we weren't so friendly, so you couldn't do anything like this.
It starts with a whisper you never thought you'd hear from Sir Paul McCartney, the last Beatle standing at 83. The names of 5 women he says he can't forgive. Stick around, because this confession isn't about chart-topping hits or Beatlemania glow. It's about betrayal so raw it nearly destroyed the world's greatest band. He leans forward, voice low. It all began at the Indica Gallery in London, spring of '66. That's when John Lennon met Yoko Ono. Public opinion blamed her for breaking the Beatles apart, but Paul's pain went deeper. He remembers her first day at Abbey Road Studios in 1968, pulling up a chair beside John, offering tempo suggestions, dropping into sessions as if she'd always belonged. Every time Yoko spoke, Paul's jaw tightened and the room fell silent. The sacred rule that only the 4 Beatles and George Martin entered those hallowed walls? Obliterated. He watched his best friend slip away, session by session. When tensions finally exploded during the White Album recordings, George Harrison walked out mid-take. Ringo felt like a spare part, and Paul felt the weight of betrayal crush him. His final straw came late 1969, when he pitched the Get Back project to reunite the band. John's reply still echoes in his mind. "I've got Yoko. I don't need the Beatles anymore." That line was the bullet that ended their brotherhood, and Paul admits he never fully recovered. Even at John's 1990 memorial, he couldn't bring himself to look at Yoko. Then in summer 1999 came Heather Mills, entering Paul's life just months after losing his wife Linda to cancer. She appeared on his doorstep at the Dorchester Hotel, a confident model with a prosthetic leg and a story of survival. For a moment, Paul thought he'd found light in darkness, but behind the glamour lurked control. Heather began dictating his schedule, intercepting calls from old friends, and insisting on co-managing his career. When Paul resisted, she'd break down, wielding tears like weapons. Their 2002 St. Patrick's Day wedding at Castle Leslie was supposed to be a fairy tale, but it quickly turned into a global spectacle of manipulation. And when their marriage collapsed in 2008 during a bitter court battle, Heather's self-representation on the stand turned Paul into a worldwide joke. She ranted for hours, then splashed water on his lawyer in front of cameras. The judge called her testimony unreliable and awarded her $24 million. But the humiliation Paul endured was priceless. Britain's tabloids gleefully cast him as the fallen Beatle, his dignity slipping through his fingers. Number 3 is the woman he calls his greatest love and his most agonizing regret. Linda Eastman. They met in London's Bag O' Nails Club in 1969. She, an American photographer who refused to be starstruck. He, a Beatle weary of fame. On his farm in Scotland, away from screaming fans, Paul found peace. When he formed Wings in '71 and made Linda a band member, critics exploded. Genius or madness, they sneered, mocking Linda's inexperience. On their 1972 European tour, crowds booed her songs chanting, "Bring back the Beatles," as she stood under harsh lights, frozen with shock. At Madison Square Garden in '76, she missed a cue during Live and Let Die, and fans bombarded her with boos so fierce Paul grabbed the mic. "Anyone who came here to put her down, try it." The hall fell silent, but the damage was done. His image tarnished, his heart battered. When Linda died in 1998, critics callously cheered, saying now Paul can make real music again. Those words cut deeper than any stage boo. Then there's Jane Asher, Paul's fiancée from '63 to '68, Britain's golden couple. Their love story gave us Yesterday and We Can Work It Out, composed in the attic of her Wimpole Street home. The nation waited for their 1967 wedding, until a shocking summer night in 1968 when Jane returned from Bristol to find Paul in his Cavendish Avenue house with another woman, Francie Schwartz, an Apple Records writer. No explanation needed. Jane calmly announced on BBC's D Time, "I am no longer engaged to Paul McCartney," and vanished from tabloids. The scene destroyed Paul's squeaky clean image. Overnight, he became England's biggest disappointment. Songs of heartbreak flooded his next albums, but the betrayal stung more than any lyric ever could. Finally, Cynthia Lennon, John's first wife, and the sister-in-law Paul once treated like family. In the 60s, he was the only Beatle who visited the Lennon home, played with Julian, even wrote Hey Jude for the boy when John abandoned them. But Cynthia's memoirs in the late 70s recast him as cold and controlling, obsessed with fame over friendship. Her 1978 book, A Twist of Lennon, described Paul as cold beyond belief during the Beatles' breakup. When he brushed it off as a ploy to sell books, the public hated him for it. Cynthia's later memoirs were like reopening old battle scars. Each new edition dredged up scenes Paul had desperately tried to bury. The way he stood by during John's final descent into Yoko's orbit, the conversations he never had the courage to initiate, the silent pleas he never voiced. Cynthia's words painted him as a bystander when his friend needed him most, accusing him of valuing chart positions over brotherhood. In passages laced with hurt, she described him as someone who watched John drift further away and did nothing. Fans devoured every sentence, and tabloids gleefully splashed headlines accusing Paul of coldness and complicity. Each reprint was a fresh sting, forcing Paul to relive moments of helplessness and regret. He spent years deflecting questions, smiling politely while his heart pounded with humiliation. So when Cynthia passed away in 2015, the world expected a grand eulogy or a flood of nostalgic reminiscences. Instead, Paul's response was a single line on Twitter. She was a good person. I will always remember those few words carried more weight than any public apology could. They hinted at forgiveness, yes, but also at a bitterness that lingered like a phantom limb, an acknowledgement that some wounds never fully close, no matter how much time passes. As his voice trails off, Paul stares at the ceiling, exhaustion and revelation in his eyes. These 5 women didn't just shape his personal life. They scarred his soul, fractured friendships, and tested his resilience against pressures most could never imagine. Yet he admits, almost with awe, that these wounds became the soil from which his greatest music bloomed. The searing pain of losing John drove him to prove himself as a solo artist, giving birth to anthems that spoke to anyone who's ever faced loss. The public humiliation of Wings taught him the price of loyalty, infusing his melodies with a raw sincerity that resonated worldwide. Jane's departure carved a well of heartbreak deep enough for millions to find solace in his lyrics. Yoko's intrusion forced him to fight for his artistic vision, leading to creative breakthroughs he might never have pursued otherwise. And Cynthia's relentless criticisms fueled his drive to redefine his legacy, compelling him to craft songs that transcended mere entertainment and touched on the very essence of human struggle. In the final twist, Paul leans in once more and whispers the truth you never saw coming. I spent 50 years thinking these women ruined my life. Now I see they made me who I am. The man who gave the world anthems of love and loss now understands that his greatest hits were forged in the fires of betrayal. Those 5 names are no longer ghosts of sorrow. They're the catalysts of his art, each scar a badge of honor. And as the interview ends, you realize the real story isn't about forgiveness or blame. It's about how adversity and heartbreak can create the most transcendent beauty the world has ever known.